B-log, I'm just going to say that how the long-term effects of any war are on day-to-day, lives of human being. There are so many problems at the moment, and I see the whole planet Earth on fire because of this new war which started on 28th of February, or United States of America and Israel, they attacked unprovoked Iran with drones and missiles, and they started this at which reached beyond Lebanon, Yemen, and the whole of Middle East. When we look at the war which is now on entering in day 38th, one wonders the effect of this war on the economy of the world. Now, with continuous missiles and airstrikes on Iran and destroying the infrastructure, in fact, the people who are suffering are the civilians. Now, when you look from the other side, and you can see the various newspapers, the Economic Times, the Guardian, you will see that they are day and night they are analyzing and giving you the warning that it must stop. Even the voices from the Pentagon, the people who are expert in the armed forces, have been warning a madman sitting in the White House that who just is serving a one mentally deranged person, a scum of the society, a war criminal wanted by International Court of Justice. Now, to be enslaved and be hijacked by a small little tiny minority, a person who calls himself Jew, but he is the most corrupt person on this earth, an anti-peace, who has complete disregard for all international institutions. What has happened is that as the days gone by, the war spread from not just between Iran, Israel, and United States of America, but in the whole region. One thing which it has affected is that the barrel of the oil crude costing, about between $60 to $70 reached $110, and it is going to increase further. The most famous analysts have said that this war must end soon. All the think tanks have been warning and yelling, but the ego of that man, I won't let it do, and it is not the United States president who has any power to stop the war this time. This authority and this choice lies with Iran. And I think they have knocked the wrong door at this time, and by doing that, people keep talking about oil and the effect of oil because of the strait, that unless it is open and it does not allow the Strait of Hormuz, then the economies of the world will collapse. And everything, goes beyond that. Money makes the mayor go. Everything, education, transport, health, everything, you need money to carry that out. Now, I will just give you the one such, rarely spoken aspect of the war, and that is the deficiency in fertilizer, which is going to affect our food chain. Very few people talk about this thing, and I am on this particular going to prove to you that how calculated and cunning and how dangerous this Donald Trump has been. A slum landlord who has everything, weakness in his moral character, and he is now out there trying to ruin the money. And these two, stooges who have joined hands must be stopped by the world if they have to have food, and they have to have transports. They can't sit down in home, have their children at home, and conduct their schools and education and work from home. The world will stop. if they are not stopped. So one can't be so helpless. All those intellectuals, all those wise men, even in the 250 million Americans and the Europeans, nearly two-thirds of the world when you include China, Russia and India, then Europe, that they can't take care of these two scum of the society who have hijacked the world peace.
The fertilizer crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, a hidden shock that could surpass oil. Experts warn it's even more dangerous than the energy crisis because it directly threatens global food security. Here's what you need to know. While the world focuses on oil, a deeper crisis is quietly unfolding. The global fertilizer supply is at risk, disrupted by the Strait of Hormuz. Experts say it could be even more dangerous than the energy crisis because it directly affects global food production. The numbers are clear proof of the scale of the crisis. 33% of the total global seaborne fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz, while more than 25% of global nitrogen fertilizer depends on this route. The Gulf alone produces 46% of the world's urea fertilizers and 30% of ammonia. Any disruption in delivery would directly affect nearly half of the global agricultural production. The crisis has already begun to unfold. Global fertilizer supply chains have shrunk to less than 33%. Major exports from Qatar, which alone supplies 14% of the world's urea, have also stopped. In recent weeks, urea prices have jumped more than 60%, with expectations of price increases exceeding 30% for these key agricultural fertilizers in the United States alone, and more than 25% globally. In some countries, prices have already passed $625 per ton. But why is this crisis considered more dangerous than the oil crisis? Oil can be replaced by alternative sources, whereas fertilizer is an irreplaceable component in modern agricultural production. About half of global food production depends on industrial fertilizers. This crisis is also occurring at a critical time, the peak of the spring fertilization season in Europe and the United States. If fertilization is delayed, the season cannot be recovered later. Europe is the hardest hit. It relies on imports from both the Gulf and Russia. With the Strait of Hormuz closed, Europe faces a double crisis: supply shortages during the planting season, rising agricultural production costs. This is likely to push European farmers toward less fertilizer-intensive crops, leading to imbalances in the European agricultural market, which has already been grappling with multiple crises in recent years. In the short and medium terms, fertilizer shortages could push global food prices up by more than 18%, reduce grain stocks, and put pressure on food supply chains. In the long term, this crisis is expected to cause sustained food inflation and disruptions to global food security for years to come.
Trump isn't an idiot. What if losing the war in Iran is exactly the plan? Let me show you something the media will never tell you. Okay, so everyone's saying Trump is destroying America. He's fighting an unwinnable war in Iran. He's threatening to invade with ground troops. He's pissing off NATO by threatening Greenland. He's picking fights with Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Colombia. JP Morgan says the world will run out of oil by mid-April. The global economy is about to collapse. Trump looks like the worst president in history. A complete buffoon, right? But what if that's the whole point? What if Trump wants to lose the war in Iran? What if he wants the American empire to collapse? What if he wants to destroy the global economy? Then he'd be a genius. Let me explain. Right now, the world gets 20% of its oil from the Middle East. Japan, 75% from the Middle East. India, 60% from the Middle East. Europe, heavily dependent. But here's the thing, oil isn't rare. Venezuela has the world's largest reserves. Canada has massive reserves. United States has massive reserves. Trump just took over Venezuela in January. He's threatening to take over Canada. You see where this is going? If Trump closes the Strait of Hormuz by fighting Iran, the Middle East oil stops flowing, but North America still pumping. Suddenly, Europe, China, Japan, South Korea, they all need American oil. Not just oil, fertilizer too. Nitrogen for food production comes from the Middle East. If that's cut off, where do they turn? North America and Russia. Trump is making the entire world dependent on resources he controls. Now here's the genius part. Who owns the most US debt? Who's financing America's $39 trillion? Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Asia, UK, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Europe. The same countries that need Middle East oil. There's been this fear that these countries would stop buying US Treasury bonds, that they'd move to gold or Swiss francs, that America's Ponzi scheme would collapse. But now they need American energy. They need American resources. They can't abandon the dollar. They're trapped. Trump just turned America's biggest weakness, its debt, into its greatest weapon. By starting an unwinnable war in Iran, he's forcing the entire world to depend on North America. This isn't new. Putin already proved this works in Ukraine. Russia's been fighting for 5 years. It's a slow grind. But it's restructured Russia's entire economy around war production. Drones, munitions, military manufacturing. Russia went from importing Iranian drones to making their own and now exporting them to Iran. Putin's plan, the world is collapsing anyway. So build a fortress, make Russia self-sufficient, control resources, weather the storm. Trump saw this and said, we can do the same. It's called the Technate, Greater North America, Greenland for rare earth minerals, Canada for oil and resources, Venezuela for oil reserves, Mexico for manufacturing, Panama Canal for trade control. Trump's not being reckless. He's building a self-sufficient North American fortress while the rest of the world burns. So yes, Trump looks like an idiot. Yes, he's losing the war in Iran. Yes, he's destroying the global economy. But if the goal was to end the American empire and rebuild it for Americans, to make the world dependent on US resources while everyone else collapses, then Trump might go down as the greatest American president in history. The New World Order is dead. Welcome to the Trump World Order. Follow for more they don't want you to see. And support me by buying.
Well into the second month of the US-Israeli war, it is worth taking stock of where things stand. Here's what things looked like in Iran and its neighborhood before the war began in late February. In June 2025, Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities had been, in President Trump's words, completely and totally obliterated by a 12-day bombing campaign by US and Israeli forces using American stealth bombers and 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs. The head of Israel's defense forces agreed with Trump, saying, "We have set Iran's nuclear project back by years, and the same goes for its missile program." That conclusion was reiterated by Israel's Atomic Energy Commission, which added that the achievement can continue indefinitely as long as Iran did not get access to nuclear materials, and that access was actively being denied. Iran's military capabilities had been substantially weakened by separate Israeli air campaigns in 2024, which killed key Revolutionary Guard leaders, destroyed air defenses, and struck ballistic missile facilities. Israel also heavily bombed Iran's most deadly militia ally, Hezbollah, killing several layers of its top leadership and, by many analyses, crippling the military strength of the organization. It had already taken apart Hamas in Gaza. Finally, Israel's campaign against the Iran-backed militias that supported the Syrian government played a part in the collapse of that regime in December 2024. In other words, Iran was in very bad shape militarily. In addition, its economy was a mess, destroyed by the tightening of sanctions and its own corrupt regime. Hardly anyone could argue that Iran posed a threat to its neighbors, let alone to the United States, which sits roughly 6,000 miles away. Donald Trump effectively admitted this on Wednesday.
We don't have to be there, but we're there to help our allies.
It's worth noting that none of America's European or Asian allies were consulted, and many have spoken out against the war. In fact, reports suggest that Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu sold Trump on this war not because Iran was an imminent threat, but because its unprecedented weakness provided an opportunity to strike hard to effect regime change. Why else would Trump have closed his brief announcement at the start of the war by urging the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow the regime, a call echoed by Netanyahu in his own message? So far, aside from devastating Iran and crippling its already weak military, which was predictable in such a one-sided contest, few of the desired results have been achieved. The regime has not fallen. Key leaders have changed for the worse. The 86-year-old Ayatollah Khamenei, who famously banned the development of nuclear weapons, was killed and replaced by his son, who is said to be more hardline than his father. In general, the Revolutionary Guards, who have always been more militant, seem to be ascendant, which makes sense in times of war. The Strait of Hormuz, which was free and open despite many threats through 47 years of U.S.-Iran tensions, is now blocked by the new leadership, whom Trump terms much more reasonable. President Trump says that after a few more bombing runs, the strait will open naturally because Iran will want to export its own oil. This misreads the situation. The strait is not closed. It is open to Iranian oil, which is flowing freely, especially to China. The net result of the war is that Iran now makes about twice as much on its daily oil sales compared to before the conflict. In addition, if it continues to charge a reported $2 million per passing ship, Tehran will make hundreds of millions of dollars in additional revenue every month, enough to rebuild its military and more. America's Gulf allies now face a far more unstable and tense environment than they did before the war. Their business models require peace, stability, and economic integration. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had mended ties with Iran in 2023 because he wanted to calm geopolitical waters to pursue his ambitious program of modernization. Today, all that progress is in jeopardy as oil exports are crippled and the region has gone from having a path to be an oasis of stability rather than a cauldron of conflict. The obvious winner is Russia, which will make billions of extra dollars every month as the price of oil rises and America waves sanctions against it. Ukraine loses as weapons it needs are diverted to the Middle East. Europe loses as it faces crushing energy costs, and Trump demands that NATO fight his war and threatens to pull out of the organization if it doesn't. It's worth noting that NATO is a defensive alliance and did not fight in the wars in Korea, Vietnam, or Iraq. China gains as America gets mired in another Middle Eastern conflict and loses its focus on Asia. Meanwhile, Beijing's massive investments in green technology shield it from many of the costs of this war, and it appears to the world as a more responsible, less disruptive superpower. Of course, things could change. Wars are unpredictable. But so far, has any American military action ever racked up so many costs for so few gains?